They're OU professors and they've kind of worked together on a pilot project.
I'm an environmental engineer and I got into this field because I wanted to clean up pollution from the very beginning. And my training was actually in cleaning up explosives pollution from military bases. But I got to Ohio and got this job here at Ohio University, and there aren't any military bases around here. So I looked around for our worst pollution. It's from the coal mining industry. So this park in Corning is by the Sunday Creek. You can't see it, but it's through the woods. Underneath all of them, underground mines, these catacombs that were all tunneled out to pull out the coal, were abandoned. As you drive around this area and you see all these beautiful forested hills, just remember that underneath it, it's all hollowed out. These mines have filled up with water. When that water seeps through those caverns, it comes into contact with coal and the deposits around it, which have been underground for 300 million years. When you expose those deposits to water and oxygen, all these crazy reactions take place. What we get is acid mine drainage. As I just scrambled down into the creek, got all muddy. This is what comes out of the mine. At this spot, there's something like 20 square miles of underground cavern, all interconnected. All of that water flows through these caverns and travels downslope. All of it comes out right there. Over 1 million gallons a day. When the mines were first abandoned, there were places where streams would just run and then disappear into the mine. So that was clearly surface water that was entering the mine. Watershed groups and ODNR have done a really good job at eliminating all of those sources. So called stream capture. These streams disappear and regrade it and plug those holes to make sure that doesn't happen. So now mostly what we have is just groundwater at a higher level than the mine.
You've done 12 major stream capture, 20 square mile area from here west.
When you close one, others open.
It doesn't look polluted, right? It's full of acid, sulfuric acid, and it's full of iron. It's full of other things too. It's really hard, it has a lot of sodium, it has a lot of sulfates in it. It would be horrible to drink. When it gets into the creek, it's so acidic that it kills the fish. This water, which looks fine, when it gets into the creek, it pollutes the creek with acid and iron. Maybe 5 miles downstream of here, there's a real severe impact on the aquatic life in the stream. John and I are trying to clean up that creek, bring that creek back to life. I'm an environmental engineer, and one thing we specialize in is designing water treatment plants and wastewater treatment plants. So our expertise is really in taking dirty water and cleaning it. First we have to neutralize the acid. Do that by adding a base. This is sodium hydroxide. You can start to see the iron. It's got a little greenish blue to it. Iron, it's a metal, and it can have multiple oxidation states. When it's in the mine, there's very little oxygen present, so it's anaerobic. And it takes this state, which we call ferrous iron, and it's dissolved into the water, which makes the water clear. When it comes out into the stream, it gets neutralized because it mixes with stream water, and it also gets oxidized. I'm going to use hydrogen peroxide as my oxidant. It's an antiseptic, right? They're really strong oxidants. The correct chemical term is it's an oxidation reaction. What they do is they just rip electrons off of things. With bacteria, it kills them. So hydrogen peroxide, fluoride, bleach, chlorine, iodine, all of those are really strong oxidants. Very similar chemistry. And this oxidizes the water. We don't have this in streams, but there's oxygen in the air, and it oxidizes the acid mine drainage. And it has that impact as well. You'll start to really see the true color of the iron. Pollution is tricky. It can be colorless and odorless. It can still be at levels that can harm you. Iron and pollution have all these different states. Oxidize the iron now. It's gone from ferrous to ferric, and it becomes this orange color, and it's no longer soluble. It's starting to form little blobs. It's flocculating. If we let it sit long enough, that iron will fall to the bottom. So this time it's floating. This is what we plan to do right here. We just got funding from the Sugarbush Foundation, Michelle, John, and I, and we're going to build a water treatment plant right over there. So if you come back a year from now, it'll be there. Intercept the water from the seep. So the water comes out, you can't see it, it's in those bushes, and it comes out like right next to the stream. There's no opportunity to treat it before it goes into the stream, really. So what we're going to do is take water directly from that seep, pump it out. We're going to use solar panels to pump the water, and bring it into a water treatment plant. And it's going to go through these steps. It's going to oxidize the water, oxidize the iron, and pull it out. In our plant, the iron will settle to the bottom, and then we'll have clean water on the top. We're going to add an alkali, sodium hydroxide or something like it, to neutralize the water so it will no longer be acidic, and then that water can be released to the stream. We could do that right now at all of these sites, but it's really, really expensive. One site that I work at, it produces 4,000 pounds of iron a day. Every day, 4,000 pounds of iron goes into Sunday Creek. True Town. It's downstream about 10 or 20 miles.
Here at Corning, it's about the equivalent of 2 junk cars, right? A day.
No, that's True Town. Here it's like half a car, about 1,000 pounds.
Okay,
So 1,000 pounds of iron going into the stream right here every single day.
The underground mines are the worst. It has to be deep enough so that it's below the water table, fill up with water. It has to have an outlet.
The other distinction is between abandoned mines and active mines. We didn't have a mining law that required reclamation until 1977. In Ohio, it was 72. So still, anything that was mined before the 70s had no reclamation requirement at all. So you could do all of your mining, pull everything out, and then just pack up and leave. And so that's what a lot of the companies did, because it takes money, and obviously we're trying to get funding to do this reclamation now. So it takes money to do that work, and when the companies weren't required to, most of them didn't. So the work that we are doing is on these abandoned mine lands. Anything that was started after the 70s is now regulated by the Office of Surface Mining at the federal level, by the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, by the EPA. There's 1,300 miles just in Ohio of streams that are impacted by acid mine drainage from abandoned mine lands. Probably thousands of acres that are impacted by.
How many in Meigs County?
Yeah, there's a lot of treatment happening along the Leading Creek and Thomas Fork. There's a lot of orange streams in Meigs. There's a lot of dead streams.
It's not good for the wildlife. And then it also is much deeper than it looks. So when you step in it, you go way down.
It also takes away all the habitat. Think about if, while you guys are all here right now, I had somebody at your house dumping 4 feet of iron sludge on your bed, and I filled your refrigerator up with it. I put it all over your kitchen table. I filled your house with 4 feet of iron sludge. And you go home and you're like, how do I live here? Well, that's essentially what's happened to these streams. There are fish and bugs, a happy little aquatic community, and then this abandoned mine drainage is coming through and depositing all of this iron, and it takes away all of the habitat within the streams. Even if you do treat it and you do these reactions, then what do you do with all this iron? And it becomes a waste product. The real game-changing idea behind what we're going to do here at this site is that we have something pretty amazing to do with the iron.
You're going to have what, settling beds or settling tanks? Or?
What we're doing in a year is really, it's a pilot plant. It's a demonstration project. We're not going to be able to treat all of the Corning water and fix this part of Sunday Creek. The water coming out of here, I think it's over 1 million gallons a day. But what we're going to do is demonstrate this technology and build a small water treatment plant. Like in your towns where you get your tap water or where your wastewater goes, a series of settling tanks and reaction tanks. We could do this right now. All you have to do is get the right mixture of chemicals, and you can neutralize the acid and you can get the iron to fall out. The problem is paying for it. Resources are very tight in the acid abandoned mine land program. You can imagine what it would cost to dispose of 4,000 pounds of iron every day for the next 200 years. What we've developed is a process where if you are very careful about how you treat this water, if you're very careful about how you get that iron to come out, you can process it so you get a really highly pure iron. When you're done, you can get something that looks like this. Pulverized iron oxide, which we've gotten from some of the mines around here. The United States has a 20 billion metric tons per year market in iron oxide powder just like this. It's used as a pigment or a colorant for all kinds of industries, including the paint industry, for making brick, for making concrete block, construction materials, stains. And it's valuable. Right now, most of it is imported from China. The rest of it is actually mined for. If we do this in a very careful, controlled manner, we can replace a portion of that industry with our own pigment. It sells for about $1 a pound. At that one seep, we could have $1 million a year in sales. We're now selling pollution for $1 million a year. We built a full-scale thing here. It would probably cost $2 to $3 million.
At $1 a pound, is this cost effective, or is it like ethanol?
I'm not sure it's a viable business. I don't know if we can clear a big profit, but we can at least break even and make a little money. And that's just looking at pigment sales versus operational costs. That does not consider the fact that we're cleaning up a stream in perpetuity. What I'm looking at right now is a partnership with ODNR and EPA where they will finance the construction of the plant. They have the resources for that. If we can demonstrate that we could clean this up for the next 200 years and they don't have to put another dime into it, they just have to build it, the revenue we generate will run it and maintain it forever. That's a pretty good deal for them. There's a lot of aluminum in this water as well. If I can separate it, and I'm working on it, if I could separate it, we could sell the aluminum. When you make aluminum, that's a pretty valuable metal. You mine for this mineral called bauxite. You go through this whole series of chemical reactions, and one step in the process to purify it, you dissolve it into acid and then you precipitate it out, and that's exactly what's happening here. It's really easy to get all of the metals to precipitate out as a mixture, but the trick would be getting the iron to precipitate first and then the aluminum to precipitate second. Aluminum is less than 10% of the total metals.
Awesome. Okay.
The iron's over 90%.
You have competitors doing the same type of thing?
The whole idea of using AMD as a pigment, a handful of people are doing that. There's a guy in Pennsylvania, Bob Hedden, who has been very successful at going to polluted sites and digging up the ochre that's collected there and then processing it and selling it as a paint. This is different. This is actually cleaning up the creek.
The government always seems to have subsidies for various businesses,
Yeah.
so to really make it maybe profitable for a company from Colorado, which comes in here anyway,
Yeah.
to do the mines, to come and do that
Yeah.
and clean it up, and everyone wins.
It's a lingering problem that we don't have an answer for yet. Some of these bigger ones. From a business standpoint, I imagine this would be attractive to the coal companies. As Michelle said, they're heavily regulated. They have a permit for the water that discharges from their sites and continually treating the water now. They're required by law to treat it forever. For this project, we're going to use slag, a waste product that the steel industry is.
The pilot program, you're hoping it would be like up and running next summer, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're hoping to break ground this fall and winter.
This is a really pivotal step in this process because there's no way that EPA or DNR, or if we're trying to go more a business route, there's no way investors are going to drop a couple $1 million at a site to build a full-scale treatment plant. So we have to go from the laboratory tests that we've been doing to this pilot project, treating a small percentage of the water, just to verify it does work here. We do have a market for the pigment, and we actually have individual paint companies that are interested in buying our pigments. It's very exciting. Ultimately, it will result in this creek not being orange anymore.
I'm the engineer. I'm really good at cleaning up the water, and I got all these jars and jars of orange stuff in my lab. I sent a couple of them to paint companies. They were like, that's not good. And I was like, well, it looks good to me. What? John's been helping me with that. I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so kind of like a guy, I'm a transplant to Ohio. I took a position at Ohio University as a painting professor. Since I don't know anything about Ohio, one of the things I did is signed up for something like this, where I went on a watershed tour. And I saw the orange streams as well. This is all iron oxide. And I'm like, well, I paint with iron oxide. Can I paint with it? And they were like, well, it's funny you should ask that. There's this guy, his name Guy. And, that's cool. And then I kind of forgot about it because we're busy people. And then one of our mutual friends, she comes up to me at a soccer match for our kids, and she was like, hey, you're an artist. And I was like, yeah, and she reminded me that they needed help. And I said, okay, sure. So I go to meet with him, and he was like, yeah, Same kind of thing. We have this, but it's not what people want. How do we make something that people want? I have a background in pigment history and artist materials, and I used to teach at the Chicago Art Institute, and that was right up my alley. I've also always been an environmental activist, so this was great. It needs to be far sexier. When people look at it, they have to look at it and desire it. In the same way that you would look at a painting and think, this has amazing colors, this is something I really like. Played with this a bit. And so if you take that color right there, in its current state, if we get the right pH balance to it, you can really, really quickly make an acrylic paint out of it. This giant tub is full of acrylic paint using this exact AMD pigment here. It dries really cool. There's a kind of a thing with fluid dynamics where you can have a better understanding as natural formations happen. So if you take this acrylic paint, you can make any shape you want, you can carve it, you can do whatever colors, and then you can actually take another piece of something on top of it, and you can push it so it smashes in between it, and then you can peel it up. And it'll make like an alluvial plain of rivers. This is a color that we made by toasting this pigment at 500 degrees Celsius in a kiln, and it turns nice and red, like that. We've got a violet. Yeah, at 2,000 degrees. Made these paintings out of lots of these colors, and that started to get us some national attention. And so I used that to actually barge my way into an artist paint company in Portland, Oregon called Gambles. And I literally actually just walked in their factory door. We don't know who you are, nobody can see you. And then I was like, well, but I have something interesting to say. And they're like, no. About 20 minutes later, they said, okay, look, our manager can talk to you, but he only has 1 minute, and nowhere else. And so he came out, and 3 hours later, we had an agreement that he likes our pigment, and we're going to make stuff out of it. We have the 3 colors, red. We have this sort of ochre, which changes a little bit depending on what seep we're at and what processing we do. And we do have a violet, which we're falling in love with, and we're finding ways to make it a little more consistently. And we want to take those 3 colors and release a limited line of these paints as sustainably harvested oil paints starting next year. Initial volumes will be relatively small for what we can do out of here, several thousand tubes a year. After that, that could be much more, 40 to 60,000 tubes of oil paint a quarter. This is a sampling of what it looks like toasted at different temperatures. First rule is not to put too much paint on there. Yeah, that's good. So now, we're going to take this, turn it over, and then use your fingers this time and thumbs and just like smash it out. It might be the worst art ever made by mankind. Okay, let's smear it around a little bit, and then let's not push it too hard.
When
Let's
the lady
massage
asked
it a
me
little
last
bit.
night when I was buying them, she's like, what are you doing?
What I was doing, and she's like, oh, that's so cool.
All right, that's good enough.
Did you get one yet? Yeah, she did one.
Burning leaves on the tree, so we have to use our imagination.
What's this one?
It's just a regular little yellow butterfly.
You know, it took me years to earn this t-shirt. I was an AmeriCorps member for a whole year and a Rural Action staff person for, I think, 2 or 3 years before I finally got a hold of a Sunday Creek shirt. I'm very proud of it.
It's an Ohio company that sells these shirts called We Add Up, and they have different themes on all the shirts. This is one of their earlier shirts where every shirt you ordered, they added a number, so everyone had an individual, unique shirt, and they all have different themes. For example, this one promotes gardening.
We Add Up. Oh, yes.
I've got one at home that says drink tap, so filling your water bottle with your own tap water. I contacted them one time about rain barrels. They have all kinds of shirts, and I have several of my own. Find them online at weaddup.com.
Like this, yeah. Okay. And you know, 20 seeps that all have too much iron, and then 20 seeps of it. So if you you can spend $1 million treating 2 seeps, and you still have 18 seeps that are ruining all the treatment you just did. So it's just too much money.
The dam was started in about 1948. They were having not just flooding, but also drought. They were trying to figure out a way to manage the flooding in this area, but also provide some water for this area too.
When they take the water from the groundwater wells, they actually have less treatment that they have to do than what they were doing when they were taking the water out of the lake. Just because groundwater, there's just inherently it's cleaner because it's being filtered as it goes down.
Is this totally an earthen dam?
Yes, earthen and of course some rock in there too. They looked at a cross section of the dam. They start out primarily with a clay core. Why they decide whether it's going to be an earthen dam or a concrete dam, that I couldn't tell you. I don't know topography, the geography of this area or what. A concrete dam doesn't have to be as wide. The width of the base down below is about the same as the length of the dam.
Burr Oak State Park is about 100 acres. How many acres is the dam itself, or the lake itself?
And this is about 721 feet in elevation, almost 665 surface acres. The Corps of Engineers, MWCD, and the state all get together in regards to flood management, water supply. Back in '48, the federal government took over all this land. Anybody lower than 730 in elevation, the land and homes were bought, and that area was completely taken out altogether. The federal government went in and purchased all that property. Later on, the federal government gave back this land to the state of Ohio. So now they own the lake itself. The only thing the government has all the way around the lake is what we call flowage easement. And that's where the land either belongs to the state park, Wayne National Forest, or private ownership. And the government pays them the right to flood it. Although, like with the state of Ohio and of course Wayne National Forest, it's not a case we pay them. It's a case where it's like, okay, you can have your land back, but we're going to take this certain amount for a flowage easement. And basically what that says is allow that area to flood. When it comes to private areas, it's a case where it's like you can keep your land, but we do pay you the right to flood it.
It's a one-time payment?
Yes.
Is this part of Burr Oak State Park?
This right here is not. This is owned and managed by the federal government.
But it's right next door?
Yes. Next door up the hill is also Wayne National Forest. So what happens if the water keeps going over and over and over and it gets to the top of the dam? What's going to happen? What do you think happens to the dam?
It erodes away.
Erodes away almost like a sand castle. That's the only problem. Once you start getting water going over it and you get the least bit of opening, it goes. One of the pros of an earthen dam, though, is if you have an earthquake in this area, the earthen dam has a lot more flexibility than a concrete dam does. If we have the water coming up way too fast, and we can't open the gates enough to let all that water out before it wants to top the dam. So what we have all the way on the other side, it's about 1,000 feet from the intake structure over there, farther down, so we call a spillway, where it's about 20 feet lower than the dam. So what happens if the water is just coming up way too fast, then it will go over the spillway, and it is made specifically for that purpose, to allow water to go over. It has concrete on it. It's not going to degrade. The water is supposed to go over the spillway first before it goes over the top of the dam.
How high has the water ever been here?
It's gotten to at least 735. The spillway is 740. Flowage easement, though, around the lake is 745. It was finished in '52. The lake is like one big bathtub. If you turn on the water, and the water keeps going and going and going and going, water's coming through the floor, right? Same as this. If it keeps raining and raining and raining, you don't do anything. And you just got a big bowl, what's going to happen? It's going to go over. To manage it, we have the intake structure over here. It's almost the same thing as a drain in a bathtub. If the water starts getting too high or too low, we can adjust the gates for the intake. Out of here, we can go ahead and cross over the dam.
It's just a football.
This is the drain for the bathtub. You've got 3 gates, and each gate down below is 4 feet by 7 feet. The question is, you see 6 of them here though. While there's 6 by Austin, there's 3. These are the 3 main gates that are blind to control or manage the water in the lake. These guys have to go down below and work on the gates. That's kind of hard to do when the water's coming through. So you got to do something in regards to keep that water from coming out, whether you have to work on the gate or whatever.
Well, we've got a maintenance bulkhead outside.
Yes,
that row 3 are what we call the emergency gates, and these 3 are the service gates.
So when you say bulkhead, there's like a coffer dam?
It's just it's a lightweight version of the gates. We set it down with a 1-ton hoist, and then we can open both sets of gates in the series to get under them to inspect them. We just did yesterday.
So when you say set it down, on cable and a track? Or?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a 1-ton electric chain hoist and a trolley on the face of the intake structure. Set it straight down until it hits the bottom, come in, open these 2 gates, drain it, and then you go down and do what you got.
So you got these valves here, but you got electric motors on them.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the handle for, what's the valve do if the electric motor is turning the valve?
The handle does nothing. There's a lever right in front. That goes from, see right now it's the hand crank, or the hand wheel is in neutral. Now you can raise and lower.
Mainly.
It's not an easy task.
Mainly.
In case a motor would break or if the power went out and the generator was dead.
Put it in gear.
And these
Secondary means.
These aren't cable. It's a screw type rod that goes up and down that moves the gate up and down. And these are highly technical ways of telling how high.
So at what point would you panic?
If the water gets this high, God save the Queen. The elevation of the dam is 765 feet above sea level. The current elevation of the lake is 721.46, I think is what it was this morning. 10 extra feet of water in the lake. That's as high as the dam has ever been tested. We go into panic mode at 7:28, called surveillance mode. Then there's people here around the clock. On the downstream face of the dam, there are 20 depth tubes that let you know how much water is seeping through the dam. They get monitored once daily, and then as the farther it comes up, they get monitored hourly. 10 feet above where the lake is now is the pool of record. And then that's still 8.5 feet below the emergency spillway crest. There's got to be a massive influx of water because the spillway is 25 feet lower than the top of the dam. We cycle all these gates once a month.
Once a month.
Cycle them, grease them, and inspect them. All 6 gates.
They're monitored and taken care of 365 days a year, 24/7.
Everybody's subject to be called in at any time.
All dams leak. Even the Hoover Dam leaks somewhere. You never got to get them sealed completely.
Do they all fill up with silt?
Eventually, yes. And the engineers are pretty good about figuring out about how much how long it will take the silt in to the point it can't be used anymore.
You talked about maintenance, but do you replace them on a scheduled basis?
No, these 2 here are still 1949 model, untouched. Are you familiar? You know what a megalmeter test is? Test the breakdown of the insulation in the windings. We had 1 motor out of 6 that the numbers were starting to fall off. So we've been rebuilding 2 motors a year.
Do you redo the winding?
Yes, they redo the winding, rewind the motors, new bushings, bearings, seals, test everything. It's 15 minutes to run one all the way up and all the way down, and sometimes that's all they'll get ran for a month's time. So there's very little load on them, very little run time. They're slow speed motors. As long as you keep them greased. They were put in 1949 and just serviced in 2017. So life expectancy.
All this stuff is so old that you can't just go and buy a new part or buy a new motor. Everything has to be pretty much either rebuilt or custom made.
These gate stand operators were custom made for this project. The gearboxes, the shaft drives, everything.
It's possible to bring it up a little, bring it back down again, show them how it...
Yeah, there's a set of drive gears, small, a bigger intermediate gear, and then a large gear that's got a threaded insert in the center. Gear just spins around the shaft,
Who would,
raises it up, drops it down.
who'd like to try and crank it down?
Me.
What just
That's
happened?
easy.
Late?
Nothing.
Yeah, what happened?
That gate's still closed.
Oh, okay.
That's gotta go. You gotta make like 15 revolutions before it engages. Taking it down's the easy part.
Hey guys, higher end, I can do this all day.
Gravity's working with you on that one. Bringing it up's the part that's awful.
Now this is the answer to job loss in Southeast Ohio, right here.
I don't think you get too little
It's moving. Are you guys joking or is it moving?
It's like 28 revolutions for 1.2 inches.
I guess you did. Don't make yourself.
Oh, hey, you can measure yourself.
Yeah, see if you want to be 764 feet tall. 740 every 10 feet.
It's always on the downstream, so it must be.
Yeah. That's reminded him of that.
That's the backup to the backup.
Yeah, right?
Spillway. Settling pond.
Get out of the car. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Sunday Creek has 100-year lease.
Just for their property, and we're trying to get the mineral rights back. But that's a long time to have it leased out. I worked in coal mining history. We talk a lot about the negatives of coal mining. Close to 5,000 deaths between 1874 and 1995. It was the most dangerous occupation in America. And the guys would wear farewell notes inside their clothes. They came here, many of them from other countries. The first immigration wave was British. And there was a man in Great Britain telling them to get out and go to America because you couldn't vote in Great Britain unless you owned property. Most miners own nothing. So they came here in droves. But they were followed every 5-10 years by another country who said, boy, this is a great idea. And they all start coming in. They started mining before the Civil War, but transportation was an issue. So it doesn't really open up until you get the railroads. Coming in right around 1869. So the men are coming in, and they've already been fighting the labor battles overseas. They knew what they were up against. And a lot of the issues have not changed from country to country. Safety issues, money, child labor laws, these are things they all fought for. One of the first things they fought for were 2 mine entrances. The company said that was too expensive and it wasn't really necessary. But then they had several disasters right in a row where men were trapped and sometimes died because they could not get back out. Even here at Millfield, some of the men climbed up a shaft to get out. In 1874, they got a mine inspector, but they didn't have any enforcement. And they were fighting for air quality, gas testing, more than one entrance. So there's one mine inspector for the whole state. So then the coal operator said, well, obviously you need 2 mine inspectors. So they got a second one. His name was Poston. Does that name sound familiar to anybody?
Oh, this was the Poston mine before.
Yes, it was.
Sandy
So
Creek,
basically
right?
the mine operators used their pole and got the second guy as a mine inspector who was a member of that family. And he consistently voted against whatever the first one said. He says, you need more posts? Nah. They constantly had to keep going back to the legislature and fighting for these issues. See, in the 1859s, the first recorded strike in the Hocking Valley. But in 1869, then things really start happening. There are 2 schools of thought on this. Trade unionism, which is everybody that works in a particular industry, all together, no matter what, from the top guy down to the mule boy. Or there was the Knights of Labor. The Knights of Labor believed you could build a better society, and that if you helped the top dog in the union movement, that it would trickle down to the others. And they actually encouraged unions that were mixed with people from various other occupations, even sometimes coal operators and coal miners. I have a feeling we're about to get dumped on. Should we head back towards safety or?
The old tower. What's left?
Capital always has more of a say in what you do unless you can really get organized. Safety, child labor, money you could actually live on. Another one was the forced shopping at the company store. The prices were 20 to 25% higher. And if you didn't shop at the company store, they'd fire you or find a job that didn't pay as well. You were paid by the ton, not the hour, back in the 1800s. So you would maybe be working all day in water up over your knees because they knew who shopped at the company store and who didn't. One person said if you were willing to go in debt to the company store, they'd let you work all you wanted. Absolutely. But if you didn't, if you were careful and shopped elsewhere, then you probably would be fired, laid off first. The miners wanted recognition of their right to organize, so they start in the 1870s with mine inspectors, and then they gradually work up to getting the miners to vote for people who will represent them at the state and national level. The Knights of Labor didn't believe in strikes. They believed in cooperation, arbitration, cooperative stores. They felt it was possible to make a better world. They also were founded in 1869, and by 1875 or so, they're coming into the Hocking Valley. And within a few years, they're all over. If you visit the cemeteries around here, you will see stones with the triangle on them, telling you that they were either a member or maybe even that the Knights of Labor paid for their marker. They were a very religious organization, Christians, so the bottom of this triangle stood for a belief in a creator. The other 2 sides are capital and labor. And what they were looking for was a balance. Since they believed in giving back to society, they accepted blacks and women in the 1880s. But you could not be in the Knights of Labor if you were a bartender, prostitute, banker, or lawyer.
Banker or lawyer.
Because those are parasites on society. They believed that those people took advantage of the poor. And the Knights of Labor very quickly became very powerful. Within just a few years, they're all over. The headquarters moves from Akron or Cleveland to Shawnee. You had to be very secretive about being in a union. You'd be blacklisted, which meant nobody would hire you. Put your name on a list and they'd share it with all the other companies in your area. So you had signals to let people know who you were. This means I'm a working man because my hat has to keep the dirt out of my eyes and the sun out of my face. Carried a token like this, which was usually a quarter that you would take to a blacksmith and cut the triangle in it and then put your initials or your local or at least the KOL in there, and you'd show that to people. You'd shake hands. and let them see that you were a member. And you weren't allowed to say the name out loud, so you said it with 5 knocks because it was the Holy and Noble Order of the Knights of Labor, where you wrote it with 5 stars. From 1869 to 1879, they were top secret. But then attitudes started changing towards unions, and that's when they started building buildings. The oldest Knights of Labor opera house is in the Hocking Valley in Shawnee. But there are other Knights of Labor meeting places still here and there, small buildings, usually stores. Now at the same time, the trade unions are making a comeback because they don't like the fact that Knights of Labor won't do strikes. And that was how the vote went. So now you have 2 national headquarters of unions, both in New Straitsville, both in the Hocking Valley. In 1884, in the midst of a big strike, during which mines were set on fire and people were shot at and things, they create this national union. And they get William P. Rend, who owned mines in obviously Renville and Straitsville, but also Jacksonville, plus mines in 4 other states. They got him involved in an arbitration plan to get the coal operators to sit down at the table with the miners, because the biggest reason for strikes was always money. And they wanted to set the price of coal for the year that the miners would be paid. They actually were starting to get the recognition that they needed. But now they've got 2 competing unions, so that's where it starts getting complicated. So the coal operators start playing them off against each other. That's where I talk about the legacy, that they accomplished all these safety laws. They accomplished gas testing, getting someone to come in and check the poles and the roofs, and water being pumped out, and mine maps so that if someone got trapped, you knew actually where to look for them. And they got child labor laws raised from where kids were working at the age of 8 to eventually, legally, they had to be 16 and prove they could read and write. In the midst of all that, they founded the American Federation of Labor, also in Ohio, and 50% of the American Federation of Labor were miners. 1898, they got the 40-hour work week. Yes, they eventually lost a lot of the unions in this area because the 1925 Jacksonville Agreement said that miners could only be paid by the day now, no longer by the ton. John L. Lewis, who was the head of United Mine Workers at the time, said there are too many mines, which there were. The coal companies had consistently made sure they hired more miners than they needed so they could get them to shop at the company store and rent their housing. Too many mines, too many miners, too much coal, and if you wanted to stabilize the prices, John L. Lewis set it up so that there would be less of those. But doing so damaged Ohio a great deal because most of the mines were way older than the mines in Illinois and other places. Ohio was his chief competition for leadership in the United Mine Workers. It went back and forth between Ohio and Illinois.
Strike in 1884 and all those benefits that miners won. They didn't win the strikes.
No, they won the war.
But the state government, the governor, and Ohio legislature saw the plight and passed those new laws to benefit the miners.
Where they needed to put their strength was in voting the people in that could pass the laws they needed. John McBride, who was the head of the Ohio Miners Amalgamated, got elected to the state legislature. Niall Heisel from Corning became the first Speaker of the Ohio House. The people running for presidents are starting to see if you want to get voted in, you need to go to the coal camps because you have a large population of single men, and men were the only ones who could vote back then, and so they're all crowded in together, and if you can get them to pay attention to you, you've got a lot better chance of winning. I mean, McKinley donated his time as a lawyer for miners. You see the mines diminishing here in the 20s and 30s, the Depression. The president went and asked all the labor leaders not to strike in 1930. He asked the people in Capitol not to lay off workers and not to cut their pay. And he asked the laborers not to go on strike. Worked a short while, and then the Capitol started laying off men and cutting back pay.
The 1861 to 65, did mining in this area have any kind of a significant impact on the war effort?
Not really, because until you could get trains to get the coal out, it wasn't making enough of an impact. They could bring it up with the canals, but the canals themselves weren't very trustworthy in that they were flooding problems and drought problems. And once you got the locomotives to start bringing the stuff up, the amount of coal being shipped went up about 10 times. It's very fast. The war tied up all the resources. If you're paying soldiers and providing for them, you don't have the extra investment capital to start bringing in the trains.
Was this coal used for processing steel or back then?
Well, iron ore certainly, steel a little later, but not too much later. But primarily it was used for factories to run machines to make things.
Steam power?
Steam power, yes. And the locomotives themselves, of course.
A lot of us saw the tower at Millfield.
Yeah.
That was the steam room that ran the conveyors, that ran the lifts in the shafts, up and down to bring up the men and bring up the coal.
One of the things that finally did away with coal, besides worrying about sulfur and things, but actually it was the discovery of natural gas. It was just cleaner and easier. Most of these men fought. When they got back from World War I, you find references to them using the training that they had to actually fight the coal operators. And one of my favorites is they would shoot out the tipple down at Chansey. Pretty much every third night or so. They had some pretty good men who could shoot, as they had a big searchlight on the tipple to keep anybody from sneaking up on them from the strikers, and so they'd shoot it out. And one of the stories is that they took a machine gun nest that they had up there. They crawled up to it and threw a bunch of sticks of dynamite in there, but they weren't lit. But these guys didn't know that, so they threw that there. Of course, all the men who were operating the machine gun scattered, and the miners just went in and took the machine gun. The miners who were on the Union side and would go out for the strike breakers and give them a warning, and they'd sneak up on their houses and blow off a front porch as a warning. But this one woman stayed outside her house in the bushes all night long, and nobody got her porch. And we forget how strong-willed and militant the women could be as well. I mean, it all been brought up in families of coal miners. Welsh usually got the preferred positions. The English liked the Welsh better than they liked the Irish or the Scots. So they would give them the foreman jobs. And the Irish always got the worst jobs because the English didn't trust them and didn't like them. Appalachian guy with a jug on the front porch, that's an English cartoon from 100 years before that shows these Irish guys. The Welsh were really good at practicing nepotism. Within a few generations, you start getting intermarriage, you start seeing other nationalities. But by the 1880s, you're seeing Germans, Hungarians, Czechoslovakians. And if you visit some of the cemeteries around these areas, sometimes you'll find graves written in Hungarian. Murray City's got some. There's some out by Congo.
They called that Hunky Town.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Hungarians, right?
Yes, and in Congo it was Hunky Hill and Colored Hill.
With this influx of immigrants, who was here before the miners, and what were they doing?
Farmers. Some of the places there were salt works, there were limestone kilns, and there were a lot of farmers. So there was a minimal population, but there were people here. And there were a lot more than you actually realize. Nelsonville predates the coal boom. There's a lot of earlier farming communities that did start up. The farmers didn't trust the miners, and the miners thought the farmers were kind of not really knowing it very well either. And the farmers thought these miners were rough, especially since they worked in such a dangerous and dirty occupation. Some farmers would warn their daughters not to go out with a miner. The English don't trust the Irish, the Catholic don't trust the Protestants, the whites don't trust the blacks. As a union, we have to get past this prejudice and start working together. The guy's name is William H. Crawford, and he's from Straitsville. And Straitsville had a pretty negative reputation toward people from other ethnicities. No Southern European riffraff had ever come to their town.
You mentioned as part of that inclusion that women were accepted in the Knights of Labor, and I've heard that about the United Mine Workers when it formed too. What were women doing in the mines, or how were they brought in to be members of the union?
They were in the Knights of Labor, but they were not members of the United Mine Workers. It was an old law on the books that was seen as being protective of women, that said women could not work in mines. And that was because in Scotland, some of the places, women were actually almost forced to work in the mines because they were small and the holes in the mines are very tiny over in Scotland. And these women would crawl out dragging baskets, bushel baskets behind them. There was a superstition about women in mines. 1934 was the first woman who actually sued for the right to work in a mine. Ida Mae Stoll, yes, she won. She owned the mine. She said, for Pete's sake, I own it. I want to work in it. But there were many women worked in mines that were their family mines. Nobody was really paying attention to mines that had 10 people or less, were considered just small mines. There was a woman in Murray City worked in her family's mine for many years.
My great-grandma did.
She was the local midwife too, and they have a picture of her standing in front of the mine as an old lady with a pipe and a hat and her shovel. I don't think most women wanted to work in mines, and they were too busy to do it anyway. If they've got kids, I know what that's like. People, yes, there are pictures of the 70s, but you look at 1934 and you'll find this lady. Stull is her last name. Stoll.
Yeah, it's a good German name.
She said, I'd rather have coal dust on my face rather than pancake powder or something like that.
You've touched on the animosity and the strife of miners and owners, but the attitude, the acceptance of their lot in life was absolutely incredible to me. To go in that mine, stand in water, dark, come out covered with coal dust, take a shower, get up the next day, go back and do the same thing.
6 days a week, 10 to 12 hours a day. And that's what was expected of you. I can't understand how they managed to work that many hours, but my husband's father did. The only day he saw the sun was Sunday. I don't know how they did it. They certainly became very strong.
Yes.
There were a lot of them went into athletics. They won boxing matches, races. Some of them went into pro baseball. There was one with the Cincinnati Red Stockings. I think another one played for Pittsburgh. And they said you didn't want to get in a fight with a miner because he probably could clean your clock. These guys were all day long using picks and shovels, lifting heavy objects. They were probably much more fit. You did have the black lung problem. Miners died of lung ailments before it was ever really identified as something that you could fix.
Yeah.
They would have what they called miner's cough, and it was considered normal. So if you look on the death records, you'll find miner's pneumonia listed as a cause of death clear back in the late 1880s, 1890s. So they already knew what it was, but they didn't see it as anything that they could do anything about. Besides the men that died in the mines, and I said there were, according to this one book, there were close to 5,000 by 1995. There were all the men who were laid up, injured, crippled, in hospitals, bedridden, the addition of the miner's cough, the black lung making it impossible for them to work or to sleep lying down. There's no workman's compensation, no medical insurance. The only thing they had was a membership in a fraternal order, which would probably help bury them if they died. And that's why they belonged. Besides the social activities, it was some way of making sure that you did have enough money so that your family didn't have to deal with this.
What was the story about if the miner was injured, then weren't they just kicked out of the house and
it could be
the family was gone too?
If they were in company housing and the miner's gone, then they need that house for someone else. If the guy's crippled up and can't work, or if he's killed. And so his widow may only have a few weeks to find somewhere else to go, unless she can find a way to make a living. And the most common way was actually to get married again as quickly as you could. You could try being a seamstress or running a boarding house, as being one of the few legal, but most legal opportunities. Most women didn't have, they might have a high school education, certainly not beyond that, and most people didn't go beyond 8th grade. Men were more likely to only have gone to 6th grade, just because there were jobs waiting for them. Women sometimes would stay a little longer unless they got married. because there was no reason necessarily for them to quit going to school. What few jobs there were for women usually required a little more education than the men's jobs did. Your choices are to put your son to work if you have one that's old enough. I heard a story one time of a guy who took over being the breadwinner of the family when he was 14. And his daughter told me about it. Said he worked at 8 different mines, was injured several times, but she said he was very casual about injuries. Heard of one guy that was crippled, and he eventually ran a gas station. You know, he found some money and did that, but he never walked without crutches again, and his son went into the mines and worked for him. Well, somebody had to take over. There's 2 brothers from Shawnee named Lewis, no relation to John L. One of them became Labor Commissioner of Ohio, and the other one became President of the United Mine Workers for 2 years. Both of them eventually became lawyers. But when they were 14 and 16, their father died, and they took over helping raise the rest of the family, because they were the oldest 2. And one of them was actually born in Wales, and one was born in Pennsylvania, but they were living in Shawnee. And so they went to work in the mines and to help their mother raise the younger ones. And that's what was expected of you. They knew that's what you had to do. It was not even a question. Boys would start working in the mines as young as 7 and 8, opening and closing traps, the doors. When the mules go out, they can push the doors open with their heads to get out. But the door has to go closed again to keep air moving the way you need it to move. And mules don't shut doors. So these little kids would sit down there all day being paid a quarter or 50 cents to be down there in the dark with a little light and maybe a ball to play with or something, and close the door behind the mule. And then they were a little older, they could work collecting slate when they dumped the coal, picking out slate. And a little older than that, they could become a laborer working with their father. Or if their father's gone, their uncle. Somebody in the family would train them. And then by the time they're 14 or so, they're probably a full-fledged miner. I talked to a guy he just recently died, and he worked in the mines when he was 12, illegally. The mine inspector kind of knew he was in there, but he never found him. Every time the mine inspector came, he would just hide into one of the side passages. And he talked to the mine inspector many years later and said, "Did you know I worked in there?" He said, "I knew somebody did because there was this really short pair of overalls on the hook." He said, "I just didn't know who it was." But he said, "I knew there was an underage person in there somewhere."